All right, I call this meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, April 23rd, 2024. As you're able, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Especially want to say thank you to our staff who were very flexible with our agenda and the change we had to make after the last meeting. So glad to see you all here tonight. We'll start by adopting our agenda, and then we'll go into our business meeting. Board, do I have a motion to amend the agenda to add one personnel matter to closed session and an action afterwards, as authorized by the Virginia Code, Section 2.2-3711?
Second.
Motion by Ms. Franklin, second by Dr. Roundtree. Any discussion? Ms. Osborne, please call the roll.
Ms. Bond? Ms. Franklin? Dr. Guidry?
Yes.
Parton?
Yes.
Ms. Purcell?
Yes.
Dr. Roundtree?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
7 in favor.
Motion carries. Then do I have a motion to adopt the amended agenda?
Second.
Ms. Franklin and Dr. Roundtree. Any discussion? Ms. Osborne, please call the roll.
Ms. Bond? Ms. Franklin?
Yes.
Dr. Guidry?
Yes.
Parton?
Yes.
Ms. Purcell?
Yes.
Dr. Roundtree?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
7 in favor.
Motion carries. All right. We're going to jump straight into our business meeting. First up, Tony Deibler, Administrator of Science Curriculum and Library, will present findings from the textbook reviews and textbook adoption recommendations, and no action is expected tonight.
Good evening, School Board and Dr. Bragan. Thank you for the opportunity to bring recommendations of our textbook adoption committees for 3 science electives. If you recall, I presented the timeline on February 19th, and after receiving public input, sharing this content with the committees, and along with their review and use of the rubric, the adoption committees recommend the following textbooks to be adopted for 6 years. For Biology 2, Anatomy and Physiology, they recommend Essentials of Human Anatomy and Physiology, 13th edition by Pearson. For Earth Science 2, Oceanography, Essentials of Oceanography, 13th edition by Pearson. And for Earth Science 2, Astronomy, it's a continued use of Explorations and Introduction to Astronomy, 8th edition by McGraw-Hill. We actually reviewed the 9th edition, and that was what was recommended. And then the teacher and I looked at it, and the teacher felt it was almost identical. The chapters, the titles, the content, and we can certainly do 9th edition, but we have textbooks for the 8th edition, and she emphasized that the content from 8th to 9th for high school astronomy, really there's no reason to get a new one. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great, thank you for that. Board, any questions? Anybody have anything you want to start with?
Yeah, I have a quick question just about that astronomy textbook.
Yes.
I have dealt with, different textbooks in my professional career, and know that sometimes just the chapters are moved around a little bit, but the content isn't all that different. With regard to the astronomy textbook and continuing to use that 8th edition, about how old would the textbook be
So
when we get to the next cycle?
it would have been adopted, I think, in 2017 or for the 2018 school year. So I don't know if it was published I'd have to look and see the published date, but it should have been maybe a little bit before that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and they actually have the same order and everything.
Right. Would there be any, sorry,
No, you're fine.
would there be any potential access to supplementary materials that the 9th edition would provide that the 8th doesn't, or does that not seem to be a concern?
So there's only one teacher that teaches this course in our county, and or at least this past year, and she emphasize that she has the resources and utilizes the resources from the 8th edition. She liked the resources from the 9th, but I don't recall her pointing out any differences, and I don't recall any differences.
Thank
I
you.
could research that, though, if you'd like, before the second reading.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We'll go around. Dr. Roundtree?
Nothing at this time.
Okay. Ms. Franklin? Dr. Guidry?
I'll keep it brief. A question about the textbook adoption committee. So looking at this list, it was BHS rep, CHS rep, school board office rep. Was that the extent of the committee? Did you involve any community members or other individuals?
No, I did not. I utilized the process that I had seen the year before and did not have community or parents or anybody else on the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Pardon?
So no questions, but do want to make a comment. I'm not sure about the oceanography or the astronomy, but I do know the anatomy and physiology. I have been through those books frontwards and backwards, and I think I know them. But my daughter, they were great. They were excellent books. So she did very well, and it was due to those textbooks being so thorough. So I just wanted to add that comment.
Very good.
That's great. Ms. Bond? Okay. I don't have any comments either, so thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Come on now. All right, next up, Mr. Steve Sizemore, our Director of Elementary Education, will provide a presentation about the benchmark workshop data. No action is expected tonight.
Good evening, Board and Dr. Bragan. I'll try to keep this brief. This is just a look into benchmark workshop implementation over the last 4 years. Some of the highlights for our ELA curriculum: we implemented a 2-hour literacy block. We've implemented letters training, and we have connected an intervention and enrichment period to our ELA block. This is the crux of what we're here to look at, I believe, the unit assessment averages over the last 3 years. And at the end, you can see that 3rd grade is 63%, 4th grade 65 overall, and 5th grade 65, up from when they were in 3rd grade at 61 at the beginning of implementation. For perspective, I put in some SOL pass rates for 3rd grade for the past 3 years. You can look at MCPS in the dark blue and the state average in the orange. 4th grade and 5th grade. And then you can look at our district averages for grades 3 through 5. Again, MCPS is in the blue, and the burnt orange is the Virginia average. These are our SOL reading scores during benchmark implementation. You can see the state average and then the MCPS average. Takeaways of 2023 5th grade student pass rates increased from 64 to 76%, and 22-23 4th grade student pass rates went from 76 to 79. This is from our literacy report from the state. The takeaway is across all grades, the below benchmark rate fell by 4.1 percentage points from fall 22 to fall 23. Looking at our PALS data. Also, from our literacy report on our PALS data, the percentage of students in low-risk group grew from fall 22 to fall 23, and the percentage in the high risk for developing reading difficulties group fell, making improvement for the 2nd consecutive fall assessment window. And you can see 23 is very close to 2019. For our MAP assessments, for more perspective, the IRT score, which is the measuring unit for MAP, that's on a continuum that starts low and goes as higher as the student progresses through the grades. You can see our MCPS winter average in 2023, our spring in the orange and yellow, winter 24. And that's comparing to the national average. And these are our language assessment RIT scores from MAP assessments. Our next step, textbook adoption and VLA implementation from the state. And you can see in this slide some of the things that are going to happen with the VLA in the coming year. And I'll try to answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sizemore. Board, any questions? Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you're going to hear this over and over again until I don't have to say it. So when we're looking at test scores and rates of whatever, I would like to see it broken down into the different groups of children
Yes, ma'am.
so that we can see actually what's going on within each group so that we can keep a good track of where our students are not performing at a level they should so that we can put more emphasis on that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Dr. Roundtree?
Yes, I think we're making great progress coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, and our teachers are doing a great job. I don't know if this presentation is to emphasize how great our teachers are doing or how great Benchmark is doing as it's presented.
I think it speaks to the teaching. I think the curriculum that you select is certainly going to be the foundation, but what really drives it and pushes it is the instruction and the connection that the teachers have with the students and the delivery.
Right, thank you, I agree.
Sure.
Ms. Purcell?
I'll pass right now. Yeah.
Okay, come back. Ms. Bum? Ms. Pardon?
I'm just going to say, I think Benchmark is good. I've heard good things about it, and so kudos to that, and just kudos to our teacher for keeping us above the state average, coming out of an overwhelmingly terrible time and a lot of learning loss. So hopefully we'll just continue to keep improving. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, Dr. Guthrie?
Thank you so much for the presentation. A couple of questions. One, so with this presentation and then the prior one, the initial one that we had about benchmark, there was mention of VLA in our implementation. Is there going to be a plan or curriculum that the school board approves that aligns what the curriculum that we are going to have at MCPS with VLA?
Yes.
Because there's talk of a plan, but is that actually going to be brought before the school board and approved by the school board, separate from benchmark?
It would be approved from the state school board, and then we'll have to implement what the VDOE is asking us to do. I can show you the plan. You can have access to everything they're asking us to do.
Well, I know that the VDOE has a plan, but then the school districts are supposed to develop their own plans to conform with VLA. And so,
Oh, yes. We certainly do have a plan that we have been working on, and Dr. Wickham.
Yes, so we're currently working on the Virginia Literacy Act required plan, the Division Literacy Plan. We have another meeting coming up on Monday. We have a training tomorrow with the VDOE, and once we get that in a final format, we'll be bringing that forward for your review.
okay, great, thank you. And well, I guess I'll reserve my next question for that presentation because it has to do with board policy in relation to the VLA. So, thank you.
I'll just add one, I guess one small question and then comment. The only comment is about these UVA-looking colors you got in these bar charts in here. We're going to have a conversation about that.
No, they were copied right off the state.
Have to have a conversation with them then.
Yes, sir.
Maybe we've discussed this at some other meetings, but just looking at the SOL scores in the slides you presented to us, those three, 3-year comparisons, kind of across the board, both in our district and the state level. There's like a little bit of a step back in the last years. Has there been any discussion, explanation for kind of what's going on there?
No, I think part of what we could explore is implementation of instruction. How are we doing now that we've learned, letters, science of reading? Are we focused on the comprehension part as much as the phonological part? Are we dropping the ball there? Are our small groups as rigorous, I hate to use that word, but are they what we need them to be?
Okay. I mean, still way better than back in 2021, but
And could get better.
Yeah,
I mean, we can improve.
that's right. Dr. Bragan always likes to say 75 looks great, but there's 25 that didn't pass, if I'm reading these numbers
agree.
right? So
Yes, sir.
still something to work on there.
And our student groups, like Ms. Franklin mentioned.
Right. Okay. Board, any other questions or comments? Yeah, please.
It took me a little while for me to formulate my question, so I apologize. And
That's
thank you,
okay.
Mr. Sizemore, for pulling all this together. I really appreciate it. And this may be a little too in the weeds, but it kind of builds off of Mr. Hudson's question about that little, the little dip, especially the group that we have the 3 years of data for, like, I'm looking at slide number 3, I think. So that current 5th grade. Do you happen to know if the materials that they're reading, if they tend to be more nonfiction at the 5th grade level than fiction? Like, is it getting to a point where it's not, where readers need background knowledge to understand, and they're kind of beyond that phonemic awareness point in their literacy journey? Do you know if that might have been part of the issue, or?
And I can't really answer that. I hear what you're saying, and I would say as we get in older grades, we're teaching kids to love reading and to connect as opposed to just being able to read. So there's some possibly missed opportunities there to connect kids to different kinds of books, whatever they like, nonfiction or fiction. But I couldn't speak to an overall answer to why it would have taken a dip.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Board, any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Osmore. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, Tricia Metzel, the Administrator of English Language Arts and Reading Intervention, will present findings from textbook reviews that were conducted in accordance with the Code of Virginia and the Virginia Department of Education textbook review and approval process. No action is expected tonight.
Hi, thank you. Nice to see you all this evening. I have to say thank you for this opportunity to go through this process. It's been a great learning experience. It's also been really great to have an opportunity to really talk with teachers and have those in-depth conversations about curriculum and what's going on in the schools. So thank you for that. So I'm just going to briefly kind of go over a little bit about what we did through the textbook adoption for ELA. Of course, we know the Virginia Literacy Act is being implemented in 2024, so we are required to have high-quality instructional materials to support classroom instruction. So on March 6th, we adopted or established an adoption team that was created, a total of 33 people, 4 parents, 2 principals, 1 ESL teacher, 22 classroom teachers, 2 special education teachers, 1 resource teacher, and 1 gifted resource teacher. On March 7th, Google Forms were created for community and parent feedback, which included their name, email, their role in the community, and of course the feedback that they had on both of the curriculums. The process and timeline was then shared with you at your retreat on March 9th. March 12th through April 5th, all materials were publicized. So we had online resources provided on the website, on our MCPS website. They were also provided at 4 locations throughout the division. We had sets here at the school board office. We had sets at Auburn Elementary, Eastmont Elementary, and Kipps Elementary School. Posted on the walls were QR codes so that people could use the QR code for their feedback if they didn't prefer to use a paper pencil version. And then we held multiple committee meetings, and you can see that the agendas are linked there for you. And We then had a second committee meeting and vendor presentations, which then have the results attached to this document as well. Any questions for me?
Okay, thank you for that. Board, any questions? Who wants to start? No, we got some questions. You're red.
I guess I'll start. So you just walked us through the process. So the recommendation is,
So the committee has recommended Benchmark Advance, but our teacher feedback supports Amplify.
and so therefore, so I'm asking this question because it's good to meet you in person. Thank you for the
Well.
presentation. Sorry, I jumped right in there. So when I joined that meeting a couple of weeks ago, members of the committee were very aware that their views diverged from that teacher survey. And a couple of the teachers in that meeting said that they would change their vote. And part of the reason they would change their vote is not just to respond to what teachers had indicated in the survey, but also that they had had an opportunity at that point to get the presentation from Amplify. And when they originally evaluated the ELA curriculum, it was without the benefit. So I know that you extended the survey for teachers, correct?
And for the committee.
And for the committee. Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I just double checked. What was the percentage from the committee after having the opportunity to change their vote?
54, I believe it was 55 to 45 roughly.
In
So
favor?
55% had elected Benchmark Advance.
Okay, I must have just read that incorrectly because I thought I saw it a little differently. I mean, that's what I was going to ask you about.
No worries, I'll double check just to make sure I have the data. And of course, all my little sticky tabs that have my notes on it got all bent up. So reading them is a little, 55.2% were for Benchmark Advance.
Okay, I misread that.
And 44.8 were for Amplify in the committee.
Okay. So, the committee should be taking in information from the teachers as well as making their own evaluation and incorporating the feedback both from teachers but also from community members. So did you ask the committee to try to reconcile themselves the divergence between their own views and what the teachers had to say?
So I didn't explicitly ask them that, but they did take that upon themselves. I did get some feedback from teachers stating that they went back and had discussions with teachers in their building.
Yeah.
And they did some feel very heavily towards Benchmark Advance, just because it was something that they were comfortable with. And then there was some others that felt that the phonics instruction for Amplify in K2 was much stronger. So I mean, it really is a...
Yeah, because the teachers overwhelmingly said Amplify, it's like 72%. So there's a pretty significant gap there.
Right.
One of the things that I asked in that meeting, the only question I think I asked was about best practices, because looking at the approved textbooks, it used to be the case before that Benchmark Advance wasn't even approved, I think, for the 5th grade level. So it suggested to me that there were divisions who have more than one ELA curriculum at the primary level. So can you tell me what you may have found out or what you know about best practices? Because that was one of the divisions that I saw in that meeting, was that the lower grades were really, and making really good arguments in favor of Amplify because of the phonics component, whereas you had some strong advocates for Benchmark at the upper level because concerns about the content being appropriate for some of our students.
Right. So I did do some research on the split curriculum. I reached out to some different vendors throughout the state, different divisions. I reached out to the VDOE and the literacy coordinator at the Virginia Department of Education. And with the shift of the science of reading, it really isn't best practice to do split curriculum because the whole concept really is meant to spiral up. So when we create a curriculum that's based in K2 and then we shift those students to 3-5, what we've tried to build other than phonics in K2 doesn't spiral up to support the 3-5 instruction. Also looking at it from a teacher's perspective, if I'm teaching first grade and I move to fourth the next year, that's a whole new retraining process that I would have to go to. The professional development would be very overwhelming for our teachers. The amount of time that they would just be spent, learning all the different things with both components. We have to think about ESL teachers, special education teachers, GRTs, people that service multiple grade levels, our reading specialists. So it's a lot more cumbersome than just the phonics and the word and the knowledge piece.
Mm-hmm. And just one last thing, with the VLA, one of the big pushes, from what I understand, is to, with the science of reading, is to really emphasize phonics. And what I observed in that meeting was a lot of conversation about phonics, which Amplify, from what I heard in that meeting, was better equipped to address than Benchmark. Is that your takeaway as well from having reviewed both, that Amplify actually does a better job of meeting the goals of VLA?
At this time, yes. I do know that both programs are a work in progress, which is, they're always trying to make it better and build. But it is heavily in phonics, but we have to look at the whole concept of building those foundational skills, the phonics, the phonemic awareness piece, and the decoding piece. That's truly what that K2 foundational piece is supposed to have. At this time, and the teachers felt that the CKLA Amplify program did support that a little bit stronger. And yeah, that was their feedback.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll let others join the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Ms. Pardon?
I'm good at this time, but thank you for the presentation.
My
and all your
pleasure.
work.
Thank you.
Ms. Bond?
I just had a question. In the past, I've heard from some teachers that the change, as well as you were sharing, that some people with the benchmark or more, that's one of the frustrations is, okay, we just got settled and now we're changing to another one. And the cost of the professional development, all of that's not involved in the $400 and some $1,000 quotes that are here. There's lots of other components to that by switching. And is that something you're shaking your head, yes, but is that something you hear too? Because I think that's some of the frustrations that teachers do have in teaching, is it's constantly going to something else and having to learn something else and having to do. And maybe some of our newer teachers might not feel that way because they're not concreted in something, but I think some of our seasoned teachers, that's what I hear constantly is the frustration.
Yeah.
As soon as we get something, get it down pat, then we move on to something else.
Right.
And so am I correct in thinking that?
Okay, absolutely,
thank
yeah.
you.
And consistency is a big piece of that, right? Having something consistent that they can use is a huge piece, yes.
It seems, there's always something coming out that's bigger and better, but that doesn't mean that it's the best. That just means that
Absolutely.
it's brighter and shinier. And if we look at that, we're constantly never figuring out one thing and moving forward with it.
And nothing's ever perfect, right? Like there's always room for improvement
Exactly,
because what happens at
exactly.
your school doesn't necessarily work at ours. So we just have to always find that balance.
Exactly. Thank you.
Ms. Purcell?
Well, so I understand from your presentation and the things that I've read that there's really great support for new and emerging readers in the younger grades with Amplify, but then as readers progress to 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, how do you see that progression? I'll ask it open-ended before I.
So in terms of selecting the curriculum, or I'm not quite sure if I could just have you clarify a little bit.
So some information that I have is just variety of texts that students have access to. For example, Benchmark provides a wide variety with some contemporary authors, and then some information that I had said that Amplify focuses on a lot of nonfiction text, which I think is great. I love reading nonfiction, but also to make sense, you need a body of knowledge because some of the vocabulary terms will just be, for some kids they'll know, and
Overwhelming.
for some kids they won't. And also some of the fiction included things like Shakespeare and Don Quixote. And are there other things for the older readers to connect to, or is that kind of it?
Well, that's big pieces of it, and what you're saying right now, I've heard as well. When looking at some of those big name, topics, it is a little overwhelming. The curriculum does kind of, I don't want to say dumb it down, but it just kind of brings it down a little bit to their level, just so that they're having exposure. Both curriculums do that. Both of them really provide some really great background knowledge for students and provide the build of vocabulary, which I know you had asked that question to Mr. Sizemore, and we truly know that if these students are exposed to the materials and they're taught the vocabulary, it's going to build that background knowledge. So it is a little more old school, I guess, in Amplify, where Benchmark Advance has they're more familiar terms for students when it comes to the material.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Roundtree.
Let's see. I have a bunch of questions. So I've heard some arguments about benchmark versus benchmark advanced and how it's an easier transition because it's the same program. But I've also heard arguments from people that the people that are looking at Amplify didn't really look at benchmark advanced because they assumed it was benchmark, and they're really different programs. So you can't have it both ways there and make both of those arguments, that they're the same program and they're different.
So
I don't know if you want to speak to that.
no, I'll be
Okay.
happy to. So Benchmark Workshop and Benchmark Advance obviously are made by the same publisher, right? So what Benchmark, and again, I'm not a salesperson for Benchmark. I'm just kind of going off what I've had the opportunity to experience this year between Benchmark Workshop and then looking into Benchmark Advance. So what they've done is they've taken the same units, the same progression within the units, and then they've added in the science of reading pieces, where they've brought in stronger phonics, stronger phonemic awareness, really aligned it more with the science. So that's where that difference is. So yes, there are some similarities, but the way that it's implemented is a little bit different. The pacing guide looks a little bit different. It's not chunked. Benchmark Workshop is like a reading workshop, a phonics and word study, where it's not like that. It's more of a seamless flow. And that aligns with the science.
And then aligning with the sciences, so at first glance, or to my naive first glance at least, that seems like a great idea. But it's also putting blinders on your education and narrowing your education. Whereas if you're not aligned with that, you're looking at a wider breadth of material and learning more material. Why do we want to streamline all of our paths in each of the subjects so that they're all aligned with each other?
I guess there's a couple different, obviously we're doing this because we have to. We're told that we do have to find high quality instructional materials, and the VDOE has provided us with a list of what we can select. Right. If you really think, and I'm not quite sure if I'm going to answer this correctly, so you can stop me if this isn't what you're looking for, but if you're looking at specific content, are you looking at why do we teach nonfiction in Unit 1 and then fiction in Unit 2, or why do we teach government in Unit 3? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Maybe my understanding is incorrect on what Benchmark is doing. It sounded like Benchmark is aligning with other subject matter that's taught throughout the day.
So that is
But Amplify is not.
No, they are. They both do. That is actually a practice of the science of reading, is to get the students more into nonfiction text of science and social studies and bringing those in, and then bringing in reading strategies. It really is more along that spiral effect, being able to kind of tap into all of the resources in multiple content areas.
Okay.
So we all become reading teachers, even math.
Right.
Don't tell Jennifer Wall.
And then just a couple more questions. So we've already concluded that Benchmark is not as good at foundational instruction as Amplify. Why would we choose a curriculum that is not as good at foundational material?
I can't answer that. That's kind of something that was the opinion of the teachers. You can look at some of the responses maybe that they had. They might be able to answer that for you. I guess you would have to look at the strengths and weaknesses of both programs, kind of like what we had mentioned before. Not everything is perfect. Luckily, the VDOE is opening up an opportunity for supplemental materials and intervention materials. So if there was something either in Amplify or Benchmark that did not support what we needed, we would have an option to be able to supplement that. So if we were looking at a program that we thought maybe wasn't strong enough in phonics, we can find something that might help support that.
Right. It's nice to have an all-inclusive program so that teachers don't have to go and search for supplemental
Right.
material, as I understand that many of them are doing today.
Right, and the goal is to not have to do that. It's to be able to vet through and find really strong pieces that are going to support their instruction and support the learning of our students, ultimately.
Right. And my understanding is that Amplify has very well put together Google Docs material for classroom instruction. And I also understand that, or my understanding is that Benchmark does not. Is that a true statement?
As of today, that is correct.
Okay. So as of today,
Again,
many items, it sounds like Amplify is better, at least at the teachers obviously think it's better because it's 72% that they're choosing it. So, all right, thank you. And thank you for taking care of the correct.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Ms. Franklin.
Okay, so you just answered my question about supplementary material. So along with that, do we have PD that helps our teachers understand how to use that, especially with the phonics, and making sure if we go with Benchmark that that program will still be supported to give the same level of instruction that the Amplify does?
That's the goal. Do everything in my power to get the resources to the teachers to support their classroom instruction. However I have to do that in the limited time that we have, I'm going to do my best to make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
We'll have a couple in here. Dr. Roundtree kind of touched on one of my questions, but I find this to be a very interesting comparison, right? Because you've got one program that's slightly different, but people already kind of have their own opinions about it, right? And you got something brand new, right? So what did you do, if anything, to try to help the folks that already felt like they had made up their minds to have an open mind about Benchmark Advance? Like, in terms of the sessions, like did you get an even number of teachers in both of the reviews, or did they all go to Amplify and assume that they knew Benchmark?
They all went to Amplify.
Okay.
And I think they had some background knowledge in Benchmark. Ultimately, it was keep your eye on the path, right? Like, what's our point here? Our point is what's best for kids, ultimately, what's best for classroom instruction, and what aligns with the science of reading. We have hundreds and thousands of documents that support how the brain works and how students learn to read and how those foundational skills are important, but also bringing in diversity and background knowledge and building vocabulary. So ultimately, that's the big picture. If the curriculum supports that, then we need to as well.
Okay. And I guess maybe I missed this in here, or maybe I'm just saying the quiet part out loud, but if the teachers are saying one thing and the committee is saying something else, which one are you bringing to the board as your recommendation?
Well, according to board policy, it's bringing what the committee suggests, and that would be Benchmark Advance. But again, it's definitely has to be, the teachers are asking for a change.
Chair Hudson, can I say a few comments?
Please.
One, Ms. Metzel, really appreciate your efforts and what you did in putting this together. And we've talked at length about this in reading curriculum. I'm old enough to remember when it was phonics versus whole language came out when I was a young teacher in late 80s, early 90s. And as a young teacher, I'm looking at this saying, this makes no sense to me that these forces are diametrically opposed because you need to learn how to decode, and yet you also need to derive meaning from text. It seemed like that just made sense at that time that we need to do that. And the fact that now we're at the science of reading and we can use brain imagery and prove that, you do need to explicitly learn the phonemes and learn how to sound out. That a language with 26 letters and 44 sounds is difficult for children to master, and it takes explicit instruction to do that. So we really appreciate that. When we had our conversations, and I'm trying to bring it roundabout to your question, Mr. Hudson, in a few meetings ago that I think you asked, well, can we just do one for K1 and 2 and do something for 3, 4, 5? And I, being the arrogant person I am sometimes, said, well, Mr. Hudson, in my long career, we've never done that, or something silly like that. And then when we looked at the data and went over it and we were talking, I was like, you know what? Maybe King Solomon splitting the baby is the answer here, because it seems like people were embracing the idea of K1 and 2, and Amplify was a stronger program than, let's say, and Benchmark had a more appropriate use for grades 3, 4, and 5. But as we talked about it, that's really not an option for the reasons that Ms. Metzel said about the special education, the reading interventionists, the teachers that go to different grade levels. It's two totally different programs, so that doesn't make sense, right? As we weigh through all these options, we brought to the school board the questions that you asked, Mr. Hudson, was exactly what we're asking. Well, the committee went through the process, they did all this work, and they're here, and yet we resurveyed the teachers, and they're here. So that's why we brought it for discussion, without somebody strongly coming here and saying, hey, Ms. Metzel, we're going to do this or we're going to do that. We wanted to talk about it with all of you as a first read and get your read on it and see where we are. If that makes sense.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
So I may have misread the percentage. You had 137 responses, and it was 33 of the teachers, 33% who had said benchmark. Of the two, which do you think gives teachers more autonomy? Because that was one of the heavy criticisms of benchmark that I heard, was that it was very regimented. Do you think that that may be contributing on the teacher side to them wanting to shift to Amplify? Is that they think, well, maybe this is going to have more teacher autonomy? Can you help us to understand why so many teachers want to go with Amplify?
I wish I had an answer for you. Unfortunately, I'm new, right? Like, this is my first year in this role, so I'm not privy to a lot of the background other than what's said to me. So I try to keep it a clean slate and just kind of take it where we're at. With either curriculum, we're gonna have to be using it with integrity, right? It's not what you teach, it's how you teach it. And the teachers may lean toward Amplify because it gives them more of an opportunity to teach how they want to teach. Not that Benchmark Advanced won't offer that, but I just think it's something we may not have explored yet.
The other thing that I would add is that it's true that the committee is tasked with bringing a recommendation to the school board, but as we know, that the committee is supposed to reflect upon the input that it gets. And so because the committee wasn't actually asked to reconcile, to say, okay, this is what teachers are saying, you know, how do we respond to that? And does it change our ultimate vote? Because my understanding still is that with that percentage, it was based only on their personal feelings having assessed. And I don't want to say just their opinions, but their professional opinion. What their preference was, rather than based on all of this information, what do we think is best for the division as a whole, especially when only 33% of the teachers are saying go with Benchmark Advance?
I would be happy to reconvene with the committee if that's okay with you. I know, and I don't know the rules, so if anyone can direct me in the right direction, that would be great. But I would love to reconvene with them, and if that's something you would like me to bring back, I would be more than happy to, if that's the protocol. But
I mean, that would be my recommendation, because I don't want to override the committee, but when I see such strong support for Amplify, it's hard to say, especially when I know that they were asked to personally evaluate rather than to take that final step.
right. No, I completely feel you on that one. 100%.
I understand your point about overriding the committee, but really, I mean, this is a coin toss. It's 55-45. And you're talking about 30 people.
And out of those 30 people, there's only 5 parents The rest of them are educators. They may not be classroom teachers, but they're principals, they're ESL teachers, they're reading specialists. These are educators. There's only 5 parents on there. So to me, even though it may look a little percentage skewed, it's because the number of educators are skewed to what is community members. I mean, so it may look this way, but really, when you look at 5 out of 30, how could you not have in my opinion, it's a skewed percentage.
Can I
Not quite
respond to
following that?
People on the committee, as if I'm seeing it right. You've
Right.
only 5 of those are parents. The rest of them, even though they may not be in the teaching category, they're still educators.
Right.
So, and I understand you were saying there was like 72, or it's 45 to 55. So,
45, 55, and then with the
Percentage.
teachers, it's 3366.
all right, right, but
But-
there's a whole lot more teachers there, and if it's not taken into the account, the other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that I consider educators into that percentage of teachers, then do you see what I'm saying?
Can I just interject?
You have much better statistics on the teacher number than you do on the committee number, because you just have more people. As you get more people, the counting statistics go down, so you're more confident in your percentages. I don't think so either.
So Ms. Bond, just to respond to that, it's only the teachers who were in that wider survey, so they are the professionals, and they are the ones who overwhelmingly said, go with Amplify. Oh, okay.
ESL teacher. Principals, I mean, I still look at those as educators.
I agree with that. They're all.
I get it, but to say you're putting.
What's that? I didn't hear what Dana said.
She said.
Yeah, because I think there needs to be more community input. And I get it. I'm not saying that the teachers don't know, more in-depth and better, but that's why the board asks for committees to get an overall view. And sometimes I think, everyone can be opinionated and biased or whatever you want to call it and have their certain way, but that doesn't just mean that their way is the way it should be. So I think there needs to be more balance there personally. That's just my thought.
I know what you're saying. You're saying that the reason that's dropping to 50-50 or 44-55 is because of the community input is pulling it towards benchmark. But we don't. This is a blind survey, right?
There is a blind survey from the community. I believe we had 11 community members put their feedback in. That should be included in there. If it's not, that's completely on me, and I'll be happy to share that with you. There's feedback from community members of their opinion.
And I guess I would echo Dr. Guthrie's request there, and I appreciate what Dr. Bragan is saying too. You guys have a split decision here, and you're kind of asking us, what would you do, right? I mean, I like going back to the committee and just saying, maybe game it out a little bit, right? If we say this and the board goes the other way, how are we going to handle that, right? Is it worth reevaluating maybe the committee's decision based on, in terms of the order of operations, I apologize, you probably said this, was the teacher survey done first? And was the committee made aware of that when they made their recommendation?
It was all kind of simultaneous, to be honest, just because it was an expedited timeline. So
That's fair.
yeah, it was all kind of at the same time, literally within like a week window.
No. I mean, I think it would be valuable to just, you got time until the next meeting when we would actually vote, right? Not a lot of time, but a little bit of time, if it's worth having that conversation just to see, because certainly as a board, it would be easier to make a decision and agree with of the committee and
I
know that
completely
everybody's on the
understand.
same
Yep.
page, right? Because otherwise, we're going to vote how we're going to vote, and
Right.
we'll see where we land, right?
And I appreciate that too, because I being the first round that I'm doing this, I kind of appreciate your guidance as well. So thank you for that, and I'll reconvene with the committee and get some more information for you.
And I was going to say, for me, like I said, hearing so much feedback from teachers about the additional things that come up and have to be learned, that needs to be spoken, because that is a very true item. And I think you may like this program, but do you like everything that comes with it?
Right.
So for me as a board, that's what I want to hear, because those are the pieces that make happiness on an everyday basis. And that's important.
It's a package deal, right?
It's a package deal, exactly. So for me, I'm not the one teaching. So,
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
but when I hear so much negativity evolved around that kind of item, then yes, I that's the information I want to hear back. Okay, if you vote and the percentages on the survey to accept this, then you want everything that comes with it. Be willing to take it.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Board, any other comments? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, board, now we will transition to closed session. Do I have a motion to enter into closed session as authorized by section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia to discuss a legal matter and a personnel matter?
So moved.
Second.
Ooh, I'm going to give Dr. Guthrie and Dr. Roundtree. Any discussion? Ms. Osborne, please call the roll.
Ms. Bond?
Yes.
Ms. Franklin?
Yes.
Dr. Guthrie?
Yes.
Ms. Parton?
Yes.
Ms. Purcell?
Yes.
Dr. Roundtree?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
7 in favor.
Motion carries. We are now in closed session.